I have been asked to give a critique of what has been popular, the Islamic dilemma. It's important to understand that there are several iterations of this theory or this idea. And what I'm going to do is really just look at the most popular structure of the argument. And it goes something along the lines as follows. The Quran confirms the Bible. It confirms that the Bible is true. But at the same time, the Quran has in it issues. It takes up issues where it clearly differs with the Bible. So if it confirms the Bible yet differs with the Bible, then the Quran is self-contradictory or it is false. So this is the general structure. There is some nuance. I have heard some different forms of the argument. And one of the interesting verses that are used, for example, is when Allah, he says in the Quran to the Prophet, ask the people of the book if you are in doubt as to what was revealed, or this is revealed to the Prophet. If you're unsure, ask the people of the book that came before you. And what is generally assumed from this language is that if the Bible or what the people of the book have with them is false, if it's false in and of itself, if it's corrupted, as many Muslims say, so the argument goes, then why would the Prophet be asked, or why would his followers be asked to speak to those who know the book to confirm this or that point as given in the Quran? Now, there are several issues with this particular argument. Number one, the verse is within a particular context. It's referring to a particular narration. In other words, regarding this narration, if there is doubt about it, then ask the people of the book if you don't know. But taking it even in its more general, like that ayah can be isolated to refer to a general point. The assumption, the problem is that I hear from a lot of speakers from the Christian side, they say, well, we're the people of the book and we say X, Y, and Z about this particular issue. The problem is the assumption that the term people of the book, as articulated in the Quran, means the general body of Christians and Jews. If one were to just step back and think about the time in which the Quran was revealed, or from that time even unto very recently, maybe 50 to 100 years ago, we have to understand, or we have to know, that the majority of the world was illiterate. And in the history of the Christian world, the history of just the majority of the world, people didn't know how to read and write. So particularly on the Arabian Peninsula. And then if one asks the question even further, how many Jews and Christians were walking around there weren't any churches, for example, on the Arabian Peninsula for Muslims to simply approach and walk up to Christians and say, hey, what is it about this story? Or, hey, local Jewish rabbi, what is X, Y, and Z about this story? Though there were some Jews there present, the framing of the argument in terms of the quote unquote dilemma, it takes into account, or it's framing it as if this was being revealed today in a public space where the general body of people have access to Bibles, they're literate in a general degree, and they're Jews and Christians around. But the reality is, even when we look at the time of these revelations, not only were there not Jews and Christians readily available, not only were the average person who was a Jew or a Christian at that time uneducated, because of this, the language is just misunderstood. In other words, what is really being said, and this has been understood in the commentaries, to consult. Number one, it means to consult the learned among them, or question the learned among them. In other words, the learned, the educated, who were very few among them, could verify the truth of what is being conveyed. Hence, God says in the Quran, those who know the book know it, or in some references know him, speaking of Prophet Muhammad, as they know their own sons. Those who know the book know it as they know their own sons. And historically, again, I repeat, education or knowledge of the book existed with very few among the people. Now, there's another component to this particular mistake, which is the inability to really be aware of the nature of Quranic expression. For example, when God says, ask the people of the book, or read the book, there's other statements like this in the Quran for the Muslims. For example, God, he says, O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the messenger and those entrusted with authority from among you. Today, when we read that, no one takes the notion that we are to obey Allah in any other way outside of going directly to the Quran. And no one, how we understand obey the messenger, it means consult the prophetic sunnah. In other words, to obey Allah and to obey the messenger implies go to the actual texts, the Quran and the prophetic tradition. In that same line of reasoning, in the sort of constellation of meanings of the Quranic language, when it says go to the people of the book or ask the people of the book, it equally means, according to this type of usage, go to the original sources that the people of the book have with them. In other words, what the Quran is taking up as an issue, it is found in the books that came before. Now, with that, there is another mistake that tends to be made. It does not mean per se that every line by line word or point by point is that we find in the Quran is equal to what we find in the Torah and the gospel. If that was the case, there really would not be a need for a gospel because the Torah would have been perfect. And I notice how these same persons who argue against the Islam so vehemently, they have very little to say about Judaism because the Jews don't accept the New Testament for their reasons, but that's a whole nother issue. But as we understand in Islam, the Torah was revealed, and then after the Torah, the gospel, and then after the gospel, the Quran. And the gospel was actually revealed to bring out more meaning and to verify the truth of the Torah. The gospel verifies the Torah, and at the same time, it advances the Torah. This is what the Quran says. The same term, musaddiq, it's a verification of the gospel. It's a verification of the Torah, and that verification is a verification of the truth and a clarification and an advance. And then we believe, as given in the Quran, that the Quran has this same relationship to both the gospel and the Torah itself. So, having said all of that, the argument goes that the Quran confirms the Bible. But it's important to understand this is nowhere said in the Quran. The word for Bible in the Quran, the closest word is al-kitab, the book. And Allah actually says in the Quran, woe to those who write al-kitab with their own hands and then claim that this is from God. And as we mentioned in another video as well, Allah says of the Quran itself, fiha kutubun qayyima, in it are books, scriptures. Kutub is the plural of kitab. So in it are the books in their correct form. So the Quran is very clear about the Bible, that it has been, it carries with it the works of the hands of men, and also that this Quran contains in it what are in those books, but in their correct form, their proper form, their straight form, which means that they are on that as they exist with the people of the book, there is some incorrectness or there's a lack of straightness in those particular texts. Now, this is also not to say that those books have within them 100% corruption, 100% error. That's never said in the Quran at all. As a matter of fact, the confirmation that is mentioned, the term musaddiq, it means to confirm the truth. To confirm the truth. And that term musaddiq is not used musaddiq of the kitab. It is a musaddiq lima bayna yaday. It's a verification of what is before it. And particularly God mentions the Torah and the Injil, the Torah and the gospel. The Torah as given to Musa alayhi salam, the gospel as given to Jesus Christ alayhi salam. And it's important to understand this even further. Who say Torah, like the Torah study, they do not just mean the 5 books of Musa, or the 5 books of Moses. And when the Christians say the gospel, they do not just mean the content of the message of Jesus Christ. So another problem with this kind of argument is that it has to, the proponents of this argument have to differentiate between what is Torah in the sense of the prophetic dispensation to this or that prophet, or to this particular prophet, Musa, upon him be peace. What is the Bible even? Because Allah also says, he also addresses what was given to the prophets, but not everything existing in the Bible, according to their own scholars, is necessarily prophetic revelation. And they have to distinguish between the gospel of Jesus Christ in terms of what he preached, what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have written, and also the epistles of Paul, his writing, in other words, the contents of the New Testament as well as others. So to simply say the Quran is a confirmation of the Bible, which includes the writings of Paul, the book of Acts, the other apostles, let alone the 4 gospels, let alone all the material of the Old Testament, is just not true. There's no other way to put it. So the first thing that we have to do, and I didn't want to make this video too long, but I wanted to make a very fundamental point before we can engage in any argument. When I am trying to, or when we are trying to understand things or give an analysis of anything, the first thing we have to do is define our terms. Define the term. What are we talking about? When the Quran says musaddiq, a verification of the truth, when the Quran says al-kitab, when it says at-Tawrah, when it says Injil, what are these particular terms referring to specifically? And conversely, it's true when the Christians say Torah. I'm sorry, when they say gospel, or say Torah. Well, but particularly when they say gospel, what are they referring to? When the Bible itself has the words gospel in various instances, what is it referring to? When the Jews say Torah, what is it referring to? The first thing we have to do is sort of lay out the meanings of these terms, and then based upon that, or following from that, then we can sort of engage in this sort of, I would say, exchange. And in conclusion, the reason I want to word it that way is because it shouldn't be the spirit. It shouldn't be the spirit of any one of us, particularly on the Muslim side. I'm making these videos for the Muslim side, not to hurt the Christian side. And it shouldn't be our spirit to hurt any people, to hurt anyone. Allah, He says in the Quran, invite to the ways of your Lord with wisdom and beautiful preaching, and argue with them in a manner that is best. And it's a must to do that. It's a must that we be equipped with correct understanding of our religion, the correct understanding of our book. And inshallah, in the next video, we're going to talk about some of the problems or the challenges that are coming from the Christian side, even what they say with their own book. Until then, peace.